Hello everyone, you are on the Middle Ages channel. Today we're diving deep into the brutal, chaotic, and fascinating world of medieval battles. Forget what you've seen in the movies. The reality was far more gritty and complex. So grab your virtual shields and swords because we're marching into history. Let's start with the basics, the armies. A medieval army wasn't a single unified force like we have today. It was a patchwork quilt of different troops. At the core, you had the knights, the elite heavy cavalry. These were the tanks of the medieval battlefield, clad in expensive plate armor and riding powerful war horses. But knights were few and expensive. The bulk of any army was made up of infantry. This included professional men-at-arms, who were well-equipped soldiers, and then you had the peasant levies. These were farmers and common folk, often poorly armed with whatever they could bring from home. Spears, axes, even farm tools. And don't forget the archers. Whether it was the English longbowmen or the Genoese crossbowmen, these specialists could change the course of a battle from a distance. So how did a battle actually start? It wasn't just two armies running at each other in a field. Choosing the battlefield was a strategic art. A smart commander would look for high ground, a river to protect a flank, or a forest to hide troops. Weather was a huge factor. A sudden downpour could turn a field into a mud pit, completely neutralizing the advantage of heavy cavalry. Just ask the French knights at Agincourt. Before the main clash, there was often a phase of skirmishing. Light cavalry and archers would probe the enemy lines, trying to find a weakness or lure a part of the army into a trap. This was a deadly chess match before the main pieces even moved. Then came the main engagement. The sound would have been deafening, the roar of thousands of men, the blare of trumpets, the thunder of hooves, and the terrifying whistle of arrows filling the sky. The initial charge of heavy cavalry was a truly awesome and terrifying sight. A successful charge could shatter an infantry line and win the battle in minutes, but if the infantry held firm, forming a solid wall of shields and spears, the charge could be broken. The horses would recoil and the knights would become vulnerable, bogged down and surrounded by foot soldiers. This is where the melee began, a swirling, chaotic mass of individual duels and small group fights. It was brutal, close quarters combat. Swords, axes, maces, and daggers were the tools of the trade. Armor was crucial for survival, but it wasn't invincible. A well-aimed blow from a warhammer could crush a helmet, and a dagger could find the gaps in the plate. Stamina was just as important as skill. Fighting in heavy armor was exhausting, and many soldiers died not from a fatal wound, but from sheer exhaustion, collapsing and being trampled underfoot. Let's talk more about those famous archers. The English longbow was a game changer. An experienced longbowman could shoot 10 to 12 arrows a minute. Now imagine thousands of them doing that at the same time. It was called an arrow storm, and it could decimate enemy formations before they even reached the front line. The French at Crécy and Poitiers learned this the hard way. Crossbows were another powerful ranged weapon. They were slower to reload but required less training and had incredible penetrating power, capable of punching through most armor at close range. These ranged units forced armies to adapt, using shields, mobile cover, or simply trying to close the distance as fast as possible. But battles weren't just fought in open fields. Sieges were a huge part of medieval warfare. Taking a castle was a long, difficult, and costly affair. Attackers had a few options. They could try to starve the defenders out, which could take months or even years. They could try to undermine the walls, digging tunnels to make a section collapse, or they could use siege engines. Trebuchets, giant catapults, could hurl massive stones, smashing walls and terrorizing the people inside. Battering rams would pound at the gates while siege towers allowed attackers to get over the walls. Defending a castle was just as intense. Defenders would pour boiling oil, drop heavy rocks, and shoot arrows down on the attackers below. A successful siege was a massive achievement, often deciding the fate of an entire region. Let's not forget the psychological aspect of medieval warfare. Commanders used banners and music not just to communicate orders, but to boost morale and intimidate the enemy. The sight of a familiar banner could rally wavering troops, while the capture of an enemy standard was a huge blow to their morale. Religion also played a massive role. Before a battle, priests would often bless the troops, and soldiers believed they were fighting for a divine cause. This belief could inspire incredible acts of bravery and a willingness to fight to the death. What happened after the battle was often just as brutal as the battle itself. If one side broke and ran, it turned into a rout. This was the deadliest phase. The victorious army would pursue the fleeing enemy, cutting them down from behind. For the knights and nobles who were captured, there was the possibility of being ransomed. This was big business. A wealthy lord could be worth a fortune. But for the common soldier, capture often meant death. The aftermath of a battle was a grim scene. The field littered with the dead and wounded, scavengers picking over the remains. The cost in human life was staggering. Let's look at a few famous examples to put all this into context. The Battle of Hastings in 1066 is a classic. It featured Saxon shield walls against Norman cavalry and archers. For hours, the Saxon line held firm on their hill. The battle was only won when the Normans faked a retreat, luring the Saxons to break formation and chase them, which allowed the Norman cavalry to turn and crush them. It's a perfect example of how discipline and tactics could overcome a strong defensive position. Then there's the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. A small, exhausted English army, mostly composed of longbowmen, faced a massive French army of heavily armored knights. The English chose their ground perfectly. A narrow, muddy field between two woods. This funneled the French attack and negated their numerical advantage. The French knights, weighed down by their armor, slogged through the mud, becoming easy targets for the English archers. The result was a catastrophic defeat for the French, and one of the greatest underdog victories in military history. It's crucial to understand that medieval battles were constantly evolving. Early on, it was all about the dominance of the heavy cavalry. But over time, disciplined infantry with pikes, like the Swiss, and the rise of the longbow proved that well-trained common soldiers could defeat elite knights. Tactics became more sophisticated, with commanders using combined arms, cavalry, infantry, and archers working together to achieve victory. By the late Middle Ages, the first firearms, like the handgun and cannon, began to appear on the battlefield. They were primitive and unreliable, but they signaled the beginning of the end for the age of castles and knights, paving the way for a new era of warfare. So the next time you watch a movie with a big medieval battle scene, look past the heroic sword fights. Think about the strategy, the terrain, the different types of soldiers, and the sheer terror and exhaustion of being in that melee. The reality of medieval battles was a complex and brutal dance of tactics, technology, and human endurance. It was a world where a muddy field or a volley of arrows could decide the fate of kingdoms. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey back in time. I hope you found it as fascinating as I do. What's your favorite medieval battle or tactic? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the Middle Ages channel and ring that bell so you don't miss our next adventure into the past. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.